All right, let's head over to the Zoom line. I've got my camouflage on here, as you can see. I'm out. Today's going to be a special edition of Shed Talk. Mr. Warren Martin of Kansas Strong. You've heard of TED Talks. This is going to be Shed Talks today because I'm out with my dog enjoying the great outdoors that the fall weather brings. And how's Kansas weather today?
We're kind of finally getting into fall. We've been having record-breaking temperatures coming into this week, and this week we've finally gone below average. And so fall has arrived, at least for the week.
So we kind of got ushered in, and we had some yo-yo days where it was starting to hover around that freezing chill at night, and then it'd be 85 degrees during the day. Finally had yesterday was had to use the ice scrapers for the first time now, and so we got a little bit of a wake up call. So I'm, as I say, shed talk because I'm kind of trying to enjoy every little thing I can, and so I'm not as up to date on the news as I should. So I want to get kind of some of your context and reaction to a few of the headlines that I saw. And the first one is the methane emissions, the reduction act that's going on. This is one that's impacting so many different companies of so many different industries, but primarily the oil and gas industry. So, what do you know about it? What's some context that you'd like to add to it? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so being here in Kansas, we come from a marginal well producing state. The average oil well here in Kansas produces about 2 to 2.5 barrels a day. And so we're very much on the lower end of the marginal well production aspect of it. That's significant because 20% of the oil that's produced in the United States is produced by independent producers, 80% is produced by the majors. And so when you get into that 20% of oil that's being produced, a lot of that is coming from marginal wells. Here in Kansas, we're almost completely a marginal well environment. We have a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, we're a marginal well environment. And this is an issue that has really divided not only the United States, but it's divided the oil industry itself. And so you have major producers that are willing to go along with the federal government in methane controls, methane regulations. The big cost that we don't know is how much this tax is going to be. And second of all, what are going to be the actual implementation requirements for monitoring methane emissions? And if you're running a marginal well, you know that if you start having to add monitoring equipment on every well, every pipeline, every tank battery, every single point of exchange in the process of getting oil from the ground to the refinery, that drastically shrinks your margins and really puts in jeopardy a vast portion of the wells here in Kansas. So we've been kind of talking about this, and it's been an issue for a long time. In recent days, several organizations have gotten together and filed a motion with the Supreme Court of the United States to issue an injunction to stop the implementation of these methane reduction protocols going forward by the EPA until it can be reviewed and everyone knows exactly what they are. And the Supreme Court has denied that stay, which means they move forward. And the most interesting thing about that is right now, no one can tell you what their tax on methane emissions is going to be. Yet that tax began on January 1st of 2024. So we're being taxed at this point, but no one knows what that tax is going to be. So that could be very devastating to the marginal well community. And when you have a state like Kansas that is almost completely marginal wells, that is a very, very significant concern for us going forward. And a lot of it's going to depend on this election because the EPA and the individual states, the way that the law and everything's written, the EPA comes up with the regulations, they hand them off to the states. The states then have to come up with, how are we going to regulate this? How are we going to monitor this? How are we going to assess this? And a lot of the states are really in the position they don't want to touch it. It's an unfunded mandate, and they're looking at how many man hours it's going to take to be able to do this methane emission monitoring to take place. They don't want it. And so, really, no set protocols have been put in place, no set taxes have been put in place. And it's really an unpredictable line item that's on a lot of oil and gas producers' budgets here in Kansas that began January 1st, and we still have no idea what it's going to cost us.
So I'm going to ask you a question that may seem a little bit out of left field, maybe a little naive, maybe a little blow your mind, if you will, depending on how you're looking at it. And as you were describing some of the obstacles,
Mm-hmm.
some of the hurdles, and so your response can really come from two main areas as I proceed now with this next part. You can either go down the AI, artificial intelligence route, or you can go down the agriculture route, because you're from Kansas. So by osmosis, you're going to observe things, even if you work in the oil and gas industry. So one of the things that when I did a lot of reporting, magazine style reporting for the agriculture industry, I got very heavy into some of the drones and some of the agriculture monitoring, not even equipment, but more of the 5,000-foot view, the strategy, kind of where they were going. Like back in 2008, for example, I interviewed a gentleman who just returned from Israel because they had made drones the size of honeybees. And I would talk to the agriculture commissioner, Doug Goring from North Dakota, on twice a year at least, more of like kind of a update on where, the future of farming was. And we had gotten to a number of real-time conversations. And one of the more bizarre little threads was the cattle rustling legislation case that came out of North Dakota in the I don't know, from like 15 years ago, because it came down to identifying cattle. And that kind of made international, because of Canada and North Dakota and Minnesota, and you had all these different weird jurisdictions. We kind of paid attention to it because of the drone part, because farmers were starting to complain that it was being surveyed. Can you use drones to identify your cattle? And it was kind of being tied to this cattle rustling, if you will. So anyway, to me, it sounds like we might be heading down a artificial intelligence route when it comes to doing some tracking and monitoring with methane. But on the other hand, it also sounds like they're kind of using that same model they were using in agriculture, which is, hey, we want you to track every chicken. We want you to track every sheep. We want you to track every cow, which is very difficult when you've got 3,000 to 5,000 chickens. Well, it's hard to know on any given moment how many different chickens you have. So I didn't want it to be too complex, too boring of a question, but at the same time, it's a pretty advanced situation we find ourselves in. And there's a lot of legislation and a lot of public money being shoveled towards this. So anyway, take it whatever direction you want to go from here.
Okay, so I'll go several different directions. Number one, on the first part of it, is it's not an information versus lack of information issue. They've already done several studies throughout the Midwest on marginal well basins, marginal well facilities, and they found that there's nominal, virtually no methane emissions that come off of those sites. And so if it's a matter of information, that's the information you need to know that you don't need to expend an extravagant amount of money to be able to monitor sites that produce virtually no methane. And so it's not an information. AI is definitely being promoted as the save all, end all to organizations around the world, and the oil and gas industry is no exception to that. But there's a lot of stories out right now about huge, you know, balance issues on how we use AI. For instance, AI has been promoted as, hey, this can help us produce more oil, it can help us find more oil, it can help us do all of these things. But in order for that to occur, it takes a tremendous amount of money and it takes a tremendous amount of energy. And that's the big switch off. AI has greatly increased the amount of energy that is expected to be needed in the future going forward, just to be able to keep up with our current energy needs. And so there is that payoff that takes place on far as, can AI help in this situation? Well, there's no doubt AI can help in this situation, but at what cost and at how much energy expended? And does that do as much harm as if you just have someone on the ground that's doing the monitoring and testing in the first place? And so those are all things that states are weighing out right now. Those are things that the EPA is weighing out right now. And, and it's really going to come down to, if this law is fully implemented, then literally by the letter of the law, just about everywhere you have a joint where two pipes are joined together, you need to have a piece of monitoring equipment to see if that joint is leaking methane. And so it could cripple a tremendous amount of the wells that we have in production here in Kansas.
And there's another agriculture comparison, because when it comes to WOTUS, waters of the United States, that's one of the big complaints when you come from agriculture areas, that every puddle, every little coulee, every little thing along those lines has to be reported back to the EPA. And so again, you come back to the different monitoring definitions and how far what is the definition of overreach? And
Yeah.
I mean we're almost got to that point now, but I go back. There's another similarity with the agriculture thing.
Yeah. And going with that, exactly what you just said right there, that's where the Chevron doctrine being overturned earlier this year becomes highly significant, because in the past, whatever the EPA decided based on those water systems, if you had a 5-gallon bucket that was collecting water off the top of your roof, did that qualify for the, that's an exaggeration, but the way that they began to implement those regulations went to any collected body of water anywhere on a property. And up until this year, you really hadn't been able to challenge that, because the courts had to give deference to the regulatory agency that created the rules. Now, with the Chevron doctrine overturned, I foresee both in agriculture, in oil and gas, and in tremendous number of other industries, people challenging these burdensome regulations that, in effect, the industry itself is forced to pay to regulate itself. And if you want to regulate us, that's fine, but it's the government's responsibility to do the regulation, not the industry's responsibility to do the regulation.
So one of the kind of bizarre things, you talk about regulation. California, back in the 90s, they wanted to get, I think it was 10% of the vehicles to be EV, and they only got to about 1% or something like that. But the hybrid market did pretty well, and they didn't like that, and so they kind of decided not to really support the hybrid market and went kind of doubled down on the EV market. And now Gavin Newsom, I see, is in the news again, and he's kind of doing some projecting where talk to me a little bit about California some of the things that Gavin Newsom is doing recently in the news. And like I said, I think he's kind of doing some projecting where some of the stuff that he does, he's trying to blame others for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, California regularly has some of the highest priced gasoline in the United States, if not the highest priced gasoline in the United States. Hawaii sometimes outdoes them, but for the most part, they have the highest priced gasoline in the United States. And it's an election year. And so Gavin and Newsom and the legislative body that's there in California just passed some legislation to try and curb what they call price gouging at the pump. And I agree, there is price gouging that is taking place at the pump because not only is California the highest in cost for a gallon of gas, they are also the highest in taxing a gallon of gas. And so their taxes right now are at 69.8 cents per gallon. In other words, the state immediately could take off 69.8 cents per gallon. Compare that, that's over 3 times the amount of taxes that we have here in Kansas. And so, where does your increased cost for your gallon of gas come from? It comes from paying your state. In fact, if you took all of the taxes off and all of the fees, the federal and state and local government fees, you could reduce the price of gasoline in California by $1.30. In other words, the price of gas in California would become the national average if you took away all of the taxes and the fees that they've added onto the commodity that you're actually purchasing. What people go in to buy a commodity, that's what they go in to buy. If we go in and pay sales tax and we're paying sales tax more than 10%, I think every one of us in here would object to, why are you charging me sales tax at more than 10%? And in gasoline, when it comes to gasoline, it is way above 10% for especially California charging those costs. So I think that, it's one of those deals where it's an election year and they want to deflect where the pain is coming from, that the pain's not coming from their government, that the pain's coming from the oil and gas industry. And yet, when you actually do the math and you actually look at how the price of a gallon of gas in California breaks out, it is their government that has added most of that increased cost over that national average.
It's interesting how much they put on there as a tax. It's up there with tobacco. I mean, it's on a different level is what I'm getting at. It's almost it's like I call it state sponsored shaming.
Yeah.
Almost,
It's very close to being a sin tax.
Yes.
Where it's what's considered a community undesirable, and therefore you have the right to tax it higher than you tax other commodities that are on the market. And it's very much in that category.
Speaking of sins, are you still working on Sins of the Father?
Yes, I am. It's a new article I'm kind of working on, trying to develop. Sins of the Father, if it sounds biblical to you, that's because it is. So there's a biblical precedent coming from the Old Testament where whatever a father did was visited on his sons into a second, third, and fourth generation. And what's interesting about that is in Western culture, meaning European culture, even into the United States during colonial days, the sins of the father were a legitimate legal standing. So whatever your dad did, your granddad did, you were liable for those actions. Even to the third, sometimes even to the fourth generation, you were liable for the actions of those who came before you. What's unique about the United States is the United States is really the first country that came out and stood against this Old Testament biblical philosophy and said, no, a person should not be held accountable for the sins of their father. They really advocated for individual accountability. And what set the United States apart, what allowed it for innovation, what it allowed for social rise within our own communities and people being able to rise up and become more than they were born into this world to be. All of that had to do with doing away with this idea of the sins of your father. You don't hold someone accountable for what their dad did or for what their grandfather did or whoever came before them did. Now, that's been a staple of the American judicial branch since our founding. It's what has set us apart. And what's interesting is right now that has been revoked for the oil and gas industry, especially in the media. And so we have a pipeline that leaks. We have, a failure that takes place at a refinery, anything like that. Well, the first thing that you'll read when you go into any article that talks about those things is you'll start reading about all the historic moments where we've had leaks in the past, all the historic moments where there have been spills in the past, all the historic moments when there's been explosions or catastrophic events in the past. And very much the oil and natural gas industry right now is being held accountable for the sins of our fathers. And the reality is most of those were not sins. We just simply didn't know. Like all other industries, when you begin to develop and you begin to grow, there's things you know and there's things you don't know. What a lot of people probably don't know is that oil and gas was first refined not for gasoline, which that is the biggest component that comes out of a barrel of oil today is gasoline. When it was originally refined, the gasoline, the natural gasoline that came off of it, was a lot of times just poured off into a river or poured off into the land because they had no idea what to do with it because it was too volatile. We were originally refining oil for kerosene. And that refining of oil for kerosene literally saved the whale population of the world because it ended the harvesting of wells for their oil to use in lamps. But the gasoline, we had no idea what to do with it. Not up until you had the automobile come onto the scene. And when the automobile came onto the scene, all of a sudden, now there's a usage for this volatile element that we call gasoline. That if you put in a compressed container and put a spark in there, it creates a small controlled explosion that will power a car and push it down the road. And so, but we didn't know that at the beginning. And there's lots of things that we didn't know. And as we know, we adapt, we change. You look at our industry today, and you and I have talked about movies in the past, and you look at our industry back in the 1800s and what's portrayed in There Will Be Blood or any of those other movies that talk about the 1800s oil and gas industry, we have come so far that it's not even recognizable. In fact, we've done focus groups here in Kansas where we brought people together who've lived here for their entire lives and ask them about the oil and gas industry. And the vast majority of them report that they don't feel the oil and gas industry is as prevalent today as it was when they were a kid, because when they were a kid, they saw oil and gas trucks everywhere. They saw oil pumps everywhere. And when we really started thinking about that and looking at it, what we found is they don't recognize the oil and gas industry near as much now as they did when they were a kid because we've cleaned up that much. We've cleaned up to the point that in some ways we've become invisible to the public and they just don't see us as prevalent, because if you see a truck that's leaking oil going down the road, you notice it. If you see a pristine truck that's going down the road that just has a company name on the side of it and looks beautiful, you don't really pay that much attention to it. And so it has really been a transition for us. And so I'm writing this article to kind of talk about how, the media continues to hold us accountable for the sins of the father when our industry has evolved to such an extent that in many ways we've become invisible because we've reduced our environmental impact.
Is this something that is palatable to the average person, or is it written specifically for a Christian-based, I assume Christian-based audience, or is it for?
No, it's not written for a Christian-based audience at all. Sins of the Father, like I said, it sounds biblical and it comes from the biblical text, but it has been for over 2,000 years. It was a legal standing in Western society. So we're really approaching it from the legal standing aspect of it, and not the biblical, spiritual, or anything like that. Just, where did it? We'll touch on where it came from, but then focus on how it was employed. So in England, for years, if your father disgraced himself, was a nobleman, and he disgraced himself and lost his noble title, that extended to his children, his grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And so, in America, that changed. If your father did something wrong, then, he was sent to jail. He suffered for that, but you were given the opportunity. There's always social bias, there's always those types of things, but legally, you were given the opportunity to rise to any rank you wanted to, despite what your father had done. That was a unique thing here in the United States.
Where you caught my attention was when you started talking about um, how the oil and gas industry essentially saved the whales.
Yeah.
People went off whale oil, okay? And you also either before or after, in a sentence or two, talked about the automobile as well. And where my mind went at that point was, actually, it's the smoke that comes out of the back of the automobile that people get upset about.
Yeah.
So oil and gas saved the whales. It gave us a different form of freedom that, one could argue really gave horses a better quality of life, away
Yeah.
from being whipped and shot if they break a leg and all these different things like that. So, the oil and gas industry did save some pretty impactful mammals, is one example. But I wanted to get your reaction from kind of the wordsmithing, the Orwellian nature that's happening here, because in the same way that the automobile got shamed because of the oil and gas, as opposed to the emission, if you will, they've positioned it as in throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're in oil and gas, you're just the evil of the planet. And the fact that it's gotten to that point really reminds me of like how they've shifted the language so that the environmental movement really replaces all the religions. So if you take a look at the Garden of Eden, that's what the earth used to be. And we've ruined the Garden of Eden with our original sin. So we must atone for it. And the EPA will tell us how to atone, or, whoever the UN or whoever the regulatory body is, whoever the master is, if you will. But from an anthropological, formulaic way of looking at it, there are a lot of the same elements that the Garden of Eden and some of the original sin have, to where the environmental has gone, the whole movement has gone. So just kind of your thoughts on some of that different observations I made off that.
Yeah, definitely. There's no doubt whatsoever that most of those who call on you to follow the science, or who accuse you of not following the science, are individuals who have a very deep belief system, and that belief system is not based on science. It may have some scientific outliers that bolster it, but it's not. A great example of that is, if you go back and you go back to the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, and you'll see where the environmentalists were calling for a next ice age. And the oil and gas industry was going to push us into the next ice age. Well, that didn't come to pass. So then they began predicting that, nope, we're going towards global warming and the earth is going to burn up. Well, really didn't play out, because we had temperatures that began to drop. So now it's come down to climate change, to where it doesn't matter what you say, whether it's temperatures up, whether temperatures down, whether it's normal, whether it's a great storm or a small storm, everything is climate change. And They claim that it's a scientific. It really takes belief to fall into that. And the reason it takes belief is because every single model that environmentalists have put forward as far as where the future of the world is going to go based on their findings has been wrong. Every single one of them. You cannot call it a scientific process if every single one of your models is wrong. And so, when it really is a belief system, where I tell people all the time, working in the PR business, that we live in a world where you have to win the argument and then you're allowed to present the facts. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. You have to win the argument. And once you win the argument, then people will listen to the facts that you have to back up your argument. But you have to win the argument. And because of that, we've gotten to the point where people are trying to win the argument and they don't care about the facts. They don't care about where it comes from or whether it's true or not true. And so I think that that is a huge detriment to our society, because it prevents us from having a logical conversation about the oil and gas industry and what it is we need for our future going forward, and how we can utilize it in the most environmentally, economically, and conscientiously way possible.
Yeah, it's a little different how they've really tied the two together, and it might be just my Catholic upbringing, my altar boy in me, the old Sunday school teacher in me. And when I take what's interesting about global warming, I mean global cooling, I mean climate change, is not so much the successful rebranding campaigns that each one has had. Is that if it were a public company, you couldn't buy it. There,
No,
there's no information on it, and and the fact that there's never been, and this is where people get really upset, but there's never really been a double blind study. And what a double blind study is that you have two different independent research offices do the same study and see what they come up with. Meaning that if I'm going to drop a bowling ball off of the Eiffel Tower and I send a question to two separate research labs who have no idea that each other's doing the study, and they study it and they come back, you're going to come back with a very similar result, because outside of maybe what is the wind on that day, they're going to know how fast that bowling ball drops and to the second it hits, because they're going to know the weight of the bowling ball, and they're going to, you know what I mean? They're going to have enough information to where a double blind study, for example, that would be a lock, where then the governing body would say, okay, we got some correct information. We don't have anything like that when it comes to the climate world. We don't have anything
no.
like that at all. And I used to kind of soapbox this back in the 2007 to 2010, because mostly just from the libertarian side of things, because it was trillions of dollars that public money was going to have to go into to completely change the infrastructure, the way of living, our energy grid. And it almost seems like that's really what's happening. And there's a lot being changed. When you hear the word energy transition, what do you think of when you hear that word?
Well, I think there's an energy transition that's taking place in our language, but there's no energy transition that's taking place in our practicality.
Yeah.
And, anytime you mention the word energy, and you got companies all over the world, oil companies, coal companies, nuclear companies, that are changing their names to say so and so energy, because energy has become the buzzword. But when you're talking about energy transition, energy is a worldwide commodity. We learn in science, energy is not created, nor is it destroyed. It is simply transferred from one place to another. That's it. That's all energy is. And so, understanding that, and understanding what energy really is about, you have to understand that energy, anytime you talk about it as a whole, you're talking about global energy because it can be transferred from one place to the other. We have the ability to take energy, load it up in a tanker ship, ship it all the way around the world, and have the same amount of energy as we had when we started. So it is truly a worldwide commodity. When you look at it at a worldwide commodity, not a single energy source is declining, not one. Every single one of them is growing. Whether you're talking about oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, renewables, all of them are growing. And all of them are growing at a faster rate per kilowatt hour of energy that they're able to, or BTU, however you want to look at it, of energy that's being provided. All of them are growing more than wind and solar. And so it's not that there's really a transition at all taking place. It's that there's a growing market in the energy sector, and renewables are taking some of that growing market, but they're not taking all of the growth of the market. So oil, natural gas, nuclear, hydro, all of those have to step up to help fill the rest of that expansion of that market. I don't know how you call that a transition. That goes completely against the definition of a transition. Just because something takes market share doesn't mean that you've taken anything offline. Here in the United States, we think there's a transition taking place because we have taken tons and tons of coal offline, and we transitioned those to natural gas. That is certainly a cleaner fluid or cleaner fuel that is going through those plants, but it's still a fossil fuel. And that has led to a large part of the natural gas growth. But coal is being used by China and India and third world nations more than it's ever been used before. And in fact, this past week, there was an article that came out that China has just made a $25 billion investment in a new facility to take coal and turn coal into petrochemicals. So, as most people know, one of the biggest things we get from oil and natural gas is plastic. And so, what China's doing is they're developing this facility to try, because they have huge quantities of coal in their country, they're creating this facility to take that coal and transform it to where it comes into petrochemicals. So, rather than getting your petrochemicals from oil and natural gas, maybe you can get them from coal. And so, when you look at all of it, all of the energy sources that are out there right now continue to grow. So I do not understand why we still keep talking about transition. What exactly are we transitioning? The only place you can find a transition is in an extremely local or regional aspect in a very specific market niche. But when you look at energy as a whole, there is no transition taking place at this point.
Well, wordsmithing is a very powerful tool. And one of the the university, that's where people can learn how to do some different wordsmithing, if you will. But talk to me about what you guys have going on with the universities and your Touchdown for Teachers program.
Yeah, so we got a lot going on with universities. We sponsor events at all of the major universities here in the state of Kansas, and whether that's football programs, basketball programs, career days, those types of things. The main thing that we're trying to do is those sporting venues, especially, bring together a great cross section of the United States, especially in recent years as more and more females have gotten involved in sporting events and attending sporting events and showing up. So we have a really good cross section of the Kansas community at these sporting events. We go to them with looking for messaging opportunities, trying to educate the public on the oil and gas industry, as well as support our state institutions going forward. And so it's a great opportunity for us. It's a great venue for us. And we get a lot of great responses from people who engage with us through that. One of the ways that we're doing that is through our Touchdown for Teachers. This was with this year, the University of Kansas. And so every time that the University of Kansas scores a touchdown, we put $100 into a kitty. Any teacher in the state of Kansas can go in and sign up. And when they sign up, their name goes into a pot at the end of the year. We're going to draw a name out of that pot. And whichever teacher we draw out, however many touchdowns the University of Kansas scored on that season, they're going to get $100 for every single one of those touchdowns to use in their classroom. And here's what's different between us and the NEA or other organizations. We're going to give it to the teacher to use at the teacher's discretion. There are no caveats on it. There are no limitations or restrictions on how they can use it. Last year, we gave it away to a small 1A school shop program. And you can imagine a small town shop program trying to raise money to do projects. And we gave it away to them, and the teacher there utilized the money to build a hovercraft to go and compete at state competitions in innovation. And that's really what America is set apart by. We're you look at all the statistics across the board. There's very few things that we can beat China in. They just have the population to where the top 10% of their population is competing against 100% of our population. And so there's a lot of things that we lose out to them on. But the one thing America has always stood for and has always excelled at and has set us apart is American innovation. We need that in our industry, and we're hoping that teachers utilize this income to really prompt innovation in their classrooms.
Yeah, after the Beijing Olympics, that opening ceremony, boy, oh, they've got law and order down. That was amazing. The synchronization I saw in the opening Olympics, I was like, oh my word. So that's cool though. The teacher, he invested back in the kids. Is that right?
Yeah, we give it to them to use in their classroom as they see fit, and he used it to produce a project that they've been wanting to do for years and just didn't have the money to do.
Well, I thought maybe, maybe the teacher driving around in a brand new convertible would be a way for him to see fit. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you forgot about inflation, and with inflation and with how many touchdowns the University of Kansas scores, no one's going driving around in a convertible this year.
And it's Kansas, not Kansas State.
Yeah, this year it's with the University of Kansas.
Okay.
It's an open program that we move around throughout the state, but this year it's with the University of Kansas.
Well, that's a cool program, and it's a good way to give back, and it makes it fun. And you know what? It helps Kansas too. It helps the football program. People pay attention that may not pay attention otherwise, and and then after the season's done, it kind of keeps giving, and so there's some good recognition involved there. And wanted to ask you about a movie. We're kind of doing some movie reviews that are oil and gas related. And one of the movies that comes up quite a bit as an oil and gas movie is Armageddon. And I get it because of the drillers in the movie, but I never looked at that movie as an oil and gas movie. But if you do any search on any search engine, top oil and gas movies, it's always in the top 10. It's like in everybody's top 10. And so I've got my thoughts on the movie, and I'll share them with you after I hear your thoughts. But two-part question. Number one, is Armageddon an oil and gas movie? And number two, what were your thoughts on the movie?
All right. So we'll go number two first and then answer number one. I already know your thoughts by your intro. It's easy to discern you, my friend. So number one, yes, I did like the movie because I'm a guy that's a simple guy that I like a story about American ingenuity that saves the day, and someone that goes from washing dishes to creating a nuclear bomb and within 2 hours. That's a great, I mean, that's a great storyline for me. But when you're talking about Armageddon as overall, in one way, yes, I will say it was an oil and gas movie. Now, everything in it that has to do with actually drilling on an asteroid is completely fanciful, and there's absolutely no scientific or practical application in any way, shape, or form on any of that. But there's also no scientific or practical application of the Planet of the Apes, but I still like that movie too. So Armageddon, from that standpoint, I liked it because it's a heroic movie about people that just go about their own life that end up saving the world, because I believe that's what happens. It's all of us that are living our own lives that save the world. I got three takeaways that I take away from Armageddon that tie it to being an oil and gas movie, beyond the fact that it's all about American drillers that are launched into space and taught how to be astronauts, and then go off and save the world. Yes, it makes no sense whatsoever that you would take a American driller and train them to be an astronaut rather than taking an astronaut and training them to be a driller. That makes no sense whatsoever. Obviously, one of those is easier than the other. So the unrealistic aspect of it, I'm going to ignore. What I like about it, that I think is true, is how it shows American ingenuity, and the fact that every time America is confronted with a major controversy, every time America is confronted with a major problem, we come together, we figure out how to solve it, and we go solve it. And we don't care where that solution comes from. We don't care what class, what race, we don't care. We just want the solution. And I think that American ingenuity, while unrealistically expressed in the film, does express something that truly has happened in the oil and gas industry. Because look at how far we've come. As we talked earlier, look at how far we've come. Look how much we've learned. Look how we have become the number one producing oil and gas country in the world, at the same time reducing our emissions more than any other country in the world. That's American innovation. And so I love it from the standpoint of, yes, the American oil and gas industry, if innovation is going to come from somewhere, we're going to figure out how to to innovate it. And I think that's the industry as a whole, because that's one of the very, very, very few, maybe the only. I don't know of any others, but I'm not completely sure on this. But it's one of the very few movies that was actually filmed on a functioning oil well out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And so you don't get the oil industry supporting you filming something like that movie if they're not behind the spirit of it. And I think that spirit was American innovation. Number two, I think that it really emphasized the point of having access to transportable energy and products. There's no way that we could even consider doing anything in space without oil and natural gas. There's no way that we could consider going to a situation like that without transportable energy. And yes, we've used a lot of different types of energy for rocket emissions, or excuse me, rocket controls. But if you look at the current SpaceX program, the current SpaceX program is powered by a kerosene-based rocket fuel. It comes from oil and gas. I have not yet seen a single electric-powered rocket ship be brought to the market or put up for an idea. It just doesn't have the power or the transportability to be able to get to space and do what we need to do. So I think that it really does a great job of talking about the importance of the transportability of energy. But third, and this one is the most important, I think that what the movie really emphasizes is that oil and natural gas protect us from the environment. Now, the movie does it ideologically by taking an oil and gas driller and putting him on an asteroid to try and blow it up. And so the oil and gas industry is saving the world by going to this asteroid and blowing it up. But the oil and gas industry literally is what protects us from the environment. Maybe not at this point an asteroid, but it's what gives us the clothes, it's what gives us the insulation, it's what gives us the heat to be able to protect ourselves from the cold. It's what gives us the moisture wicking technologies. It's what gives us the plastics and all of those things to protect us from the heat. It's what gives our buildings the structure and the infrastructure to be able to protect them from hurricanes. Everyone that I heard that they talked to in Florida following these past two hurricanes, every single one of them that they were talking to said, yeah, we're in a building that was built to withstand a hurricane. And those buildings are not possible without oil and natural gas. You may look at it and say, well, that's a cinder block building that's built there as a hurricane proof building. Yes, you know how they build cinder block? You cannot make cinder block without kilning the cement with natural gas in order to make that cinder block house. And so, literally, oil and natural gas is that thing, that element, that one thing that has done more than anything else in the world to protect us from the environment and enable us to withstand the environment. And that's really what that movie was all about. That movie is all about that at some point we're going to go the way of the dinosaurs. And at that moment in that movie, when we're going the way of the dinosaurs, who do they call? Bottom of those holes is life, and it is the life that we are used to. It's the life that we're dependent upon, and it's the life that is going to keep us moving forward. Combine that with the innovation and the transportability of that energy, and you have something that no other industry on earth can recreate. No other industry on earth can have more precedence, and no other industry on earth can drive future countries' economies like the oil and gas industry can. And so that's why it's so important. And that's why we need to make a bigger investment in what we're doing on the oil and gas sector.
It's a good takeaway that when the planet has the existential or extra terrestrial threat, that the oil and gas industry has to come and save the day from
Yeah.
from a personnel to a product to the whole petroleum deal. And yeah, my takeaway in the movie, that was, by the way, it's a very good takeaway that you have there. All 3 points were very good. But my takeaway with that movie was not so much that whether it was an oil and gas movie or not, because I get where you're coming from, where the hardcore oil and gas people would probably criticize the language and the right versus left turns and all these different things, and so there's so much to be a backseat driver on with that movie. The bigger picture, when you take a look at the movie itself, it was supposed to be the big blockbuster of the summer. It was supposed to be the number one movie, and it really bombed. Yeah, and so there was some script deals, and it got beat up pretty well by the critics, and it probably doesn't have a very good Rotten Tomatoes score. But for me, I took away from that movie that there were a lot of positives, and so it reminds me of a company or an industry, or in this case, a movie that really knows how to accentuate the positives and not so much hide the weaknesses, as just don't bring them up.
Yeah.
Just there's no point to focus on them. And yeah, there was a lot of holes in the script, and there was parts that were not real. Who cares? Next question. Like that's how that press conference would go. But boy, check out the song. The song is still played every day on classic rock stations. So boy, what a hit that was. And hey, so and so, he did really, Steve Buscemi, that's one of his favorite roles. We don't necessarily talk about maybe the actor that didn't enjoy it, but when you take a look at the cast, nobody ever brings up that movie as, hey, that was a low point of that career. But nobody ever talks about it was a high point of their career either. So it seems very interesting to me, to where that movie is more of we're going to focus on the positives and the strengths that came out of it, and that's what's given that movie the shelf life more than anything, because most people identify with the song more than anything from that movie.
Yeah.
That's fine. But anyway, your thoughts on that, where you kind of focus on some of the accentuations while you don't really focus on maybe what some of the nitpicky negatives are, if you will.
Well, I think that a lot of people we forget what Hollywood's really about, and Hollywood itself is about telling a story. And I'm a storyteller. I love telling a story. But any good storyteller doesn't answer all the questions. If they tell a really good story, they raise a lot more questions than they answer. They give you something that you can walk away with satisfied, but you continue thinking about, and you keep digging deeper and deeper into that. And so I think that this is a good case where they were not trying to put together a probable documentary of the future of, if an asteroid came to the Earth, this is what would happen. They were telling a story, and that story was about the fact that we live in a violent world. We live in a universe that is trying to kill us. It's just a matter of time as to when it really wants to try and kill us. But we're highly intelligent people that have the ability to innovate, to create, and to do things that no other generation's been able to do. And really, then it becomes just a challenge of, okay, when Armageddon comes, when that universe tries to take out us as humans, how do we respond, and what's that result going to be? And of course, we as humans hope that that result is in our favor and not the universe's favor. But in order for all of that to happen, again, it goes back to those tools. And where do those tools come from? Those tools are not rocks and tied with pig intestines to a stick that they're hammering away at that asteroid with. There's significant innovation that has taken place here in America and taken place here in the United States, especially, and that's what set the United States apart more than anything else. And so, I think it does speak to that, and goes right back to what we were talking about earlier today, in the fact that innovation is the key for our industry. And we need innovation when it comes to methane regulations. We need innovation when it comes to oil well discovery and development. We need innovation when it comes to usage and how do we use it in the most environmentally conscious way possible. And when we're able to develop that innovation, then truly we advance as a people in being able to protect people from the environment.
What's shaking down Kansas way? What's new?
What's new for us is we did our first, last time we talked, we were about to do our first customer appreciation event. We did our first customer appreciation event. We had 120,000 people, or 120,000 people, excuse me, back that way up. We had 120 people show up for that first customer appreciation event. Extremely excited about it. It's a way to get in with, instead of talking to the producers, to the executives, really getting to the people that are working on the floor. The reality is we in the industry are facing we're facing a movement, grassworks movement that began back in the 60s by environmentalists that began to really equip and motivate people across the board to move against the fossil fuel industry. And the only way to combat a movement is with a movement. And so what we're doing here in Kansas Strong is really trying to engage with every single person that's in the industry, help them understand why they should be proud of the job they have in the industry and how to advocate for the industry. And that advocacy is not legislative advocacy, although some of them probably do that. the advocacy we're asking for is educational advocacy to help people understand how important this industry is to their future. And so that's a big part of what we're doing right now. Just did the first event. We got the next event coming up in a week and a half, and we're expecting about 200 people to come out for that. And we're hoping in the future to do about 4 of these events a year, just a way to educate and inspire our own industry to be advocates for our industry.
Now, who's your customer?
Our customer in this is every single person that works in the oil and gas industry, uh,
Okay.
from the field hands to the floor hands to the drillers to the pumpers to the truck drivers, all the way up to the refinery workers. And so we're trying to reach out to everybody in the industry and just give them an opportunity to come out, have a great meal, get some free drinks, and really find out why they should be so proud of the job that they're doing, because it really does change the world.
When's the next one?
Next one's coming up October 24th in Garnett, Kansas. And so you go to kansasstrong.com and you can reach out to us there and get more details about the event. Just send us an email from kansasstrong.com.
And you guys are serving food and everything, huh?
You betcha. Yeah. The last one we had prime rib and had a great meal, and it's a celebration. It's not like a picnic for Uncle Joe that you have to do. This is something that we're not going to bring out the bologna sandwiches. We're trying to really honor these oil and gas workers that are out in the field that don't get honored. They don't get to go to the conferences. They don't get to go to the events. And we really want to do something special for them because they're the ones that make it happen. They're the ones that get the job done.
And so I'd imagine you'd have to pre-register for this, or how does that work?
We ask for you to pre-register. And so, like I say, if you go to kansasstrong.com, send me an email, we'll get you signed up. And we'd be happy to have anyone in the industry from anywhere in the country that wants to come to it. We'd love to have you.
So if I'm working in the oil and gas industry and I'm just passing through town,
Come on out and see us.
and we're talking October 24th in Garnett, Kansas.
Yep.
Send Warren Martin a email at Kansas Strong that, hey, listen, I heard that you guys are doing a customer appreciation event. At the last one, you had prime rib. If I come to this event, are you going to feed me? Is there any other hidden costs involved? Is it too good to be true? Just kind of take 30 seconds and satisfy some of those fears that someone might have on.
Yeah, I will say there is something hidden in it. I'm not going to lie. There's something hidden in it. And so anyone working in the oil and gas industry, this is our time to really invest in you and hopefully inspire you. I hope you come away from this event and you're more inspired to work in your job than you've ever been inspired before. Number 2, we are going to give you a free meal. You're not going to have to pay a penny for it. We are going to have free drinks, both regular variety and adult variety. So come on out and get some free drinks. We're going to do a motivational presentation, and I think you'll be excited about it, and I think you'll be more proud to work in the industry than you've ever worked before. The one thing I kept hidden from you is that we will be giving away raffle items. At the last event, we gave away over $2,000 in raffle items. The biggest item we gave away was a 6-in-1 smoker that we gave away to someone working out in the field. And so we are going to give you some free prizes if you show up. It's a chance at a free prize. Can't give them to everybody, but we're going to give away a number of free prizes for those raffle items. But no, this is purely our investment in our industry, and we're looking for nothing coming back except for hopefully people being very proud of the industry that they work in.
Yeah, it's just a way to give back to the industry. Totally understand it. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't some timeshare pitch,
No.
that type of thing. Okay, all right. So
No, But if you want a timeshare pitch, I'll give you one, and I've got a bridge in Arizona that
That's okay. The one in Brooklyn's doing just fine. The one I bought from you last, yeah, it's doing great. It keeps going up in value.
yeah.
Well, outstanding. And what's the website you're directing people to for this?
KansasStrong.com. As it's a local event, we really don't have anything up on the website. But if you go to KansasStrong.com, you'll find my email address on there, and or send us a message through Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, or excuse me, X, any of those platforms, and we can talk you through and get you signed up.